Welcome to the Transformation Perspective, episode 4. All right, yes, it's a day late. I'm sorry for being a day late. This one took a lot of extra time to research, and sometimes life just happens, right? So let's do a quick recap about last week, and then we'll get into the episode this past week. So Biden proposed a Supreme Court reform. Right. So there's 3 tiers to this. The first one is a 1-year term that is 18 years long for Supreme Court justices. And every 2 years, the president will appoint a new justice. The second part of that is an enforceable ethics code for the justices. So that's basically like if they are receiving funds or something that benefits their family, they cannot be part of that case, something like that. And lastly is a constitutional amendment for limiting presidential immunity. All these have to be taken up by Congress. The amendment, you need 2/3 majority in Congress to approve before it's sent to the states for ratification. These are processes that are probably a very long time for reform. My perspective, I think we need reform on this. How polarized Supreme Court justices, Supreme Court has become, we definitely need some reform. I think term limits is a good thing for all, not just the president, but House, senators, and justices. Otherwise, it's too powerful. Another thing, jobs report came out for July. 114,000 jobs were added in July, which is a slowdown from June that had 179,000 jobs added. The concerning thing economists say is the unemployment rate rose to 4.3%, the highest we've seen since October 2021. This was during the pandemic. The last big push for the week, to recap, is the virtual roll call that took place for the Democratic Party for their nomination, confirming that Vice President Kamala Harris has received enough votes that she's basically going to be the nominee. Final results are going to be revealed next week. So it looks like Vice President Harris is the nominee. So it's going to be Harris versus Trump. So that brings us to episode 4. The middle class. 1968 wages versus 2024 wages. Let's see. So last week we were looking at wages versus rent costs. So let's look at some of this data that I left off at. So looking at data from 1968 and the wages, the annual wage for 1968 was somewhere between $7,700 and roughly some I see quoting around $8,600. That was the annual income. You adjust that for inflation, that's roughly for 2024 terms $70,942.74 to $79,234.95. That's not bad. All right. However, 2023 annual income was at $62,027. You're looking at $8,000 to $15,000 difference adjusted for inflation of where your money could get you from 1968 to 2024. Yeah, not good. And it's only going to get worse when we start looking at more of this data. So, according to the resource that I got, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the minimum wage in 1968 was $1.60. You adjust for inflation in 2022, this is where the data was coming from, was $12.12. Now it's approximately in 2023 was $13.05. And adjusting for inflation for 2024, it's now at equivalent of $14.70. Yeah, minimum wage is still at $7.25. Yeah, so it's almost double the wage in 1968 according to minimum wage standards today in 2024. Yeah, it's mind-blowing, this data. This is why it took me a while to get through a lot of this. So the last minimum wage hike was in 2009, I should say. So we hiked it to $7.25, which we're still at. So adjusting for inflation in 2009 of the minimum wage at $7.25, it should have been at $8.58. Okay. This is still well below, in 2009, still well below what your minimum wage would have got you in 1968 and your annual income. So the overall trend that we see from the peak of economic wages was in 1968 has been a steady decline, right? The trend in American wages. So the question that I'm proposing here is, what caused the decline of the value of the wages from 1968 to 2004? Would the decline would the decade after 1968, during the 1970s, which we know was not a great economic time period, high inflation rates, high interest rates, oil embargoes, Iran hostage crisis. Shall I go on? But with these aspects, would the value of the minimum wage decrease because of that economic recession that we had? Well, actually, the real wages fell during the 1970s because of some driving factors. Automation, so advancements in technology getting better, right? Digital technology, computer day and age, right? Competitive pressure from globalization, so kind of opening, sirens. Globalization, so markets wanting to be open and increasing free trade. And then just, we know it was a recession, rise in prices as well. This is what declined the minimum wage, that we saw a drop in that. But ultimately, this is where the staggering numbers come from. 1980, right? Our wages really drastically start to decline because of major tax reforms, and not in a good way that we increase taxes, but we decrease taxes. Everyone loves tax cuts. Yes, it's a great thing. Woo woo. No, it's actually not. It's actually the opposite it does for your wages. Tax cuts hurt your wages, hurts the minimum wage, hurts your overall wages that we've got. And we're going to dive into some of these right now. So, biggest decline in wage value. Here's a lot of data. I know some of you might not like data out there, but data is so critical. So, we're diving deep into this economic thing of where we are struggling today and why we think the economy in 2024 is not good, but even the numbers show it's really actually good. So, let's look at the wages. In 1980, minimum wage was at $3.10. Adjusted for inflation, it would come out to be $12.29 per hour. However, in 1981, President Reagan proposed a major tax cut reform, the biggest in American history. So you go look at it in 1985. Minimum wage rose to $3.25. Adjusted for inflation, it is now $9.79. But once again, Reagan proposes another tax cut in 1986. So in 1990, minimum wage is now at $3.80. So we're adjusting minimum wage. We're cutting taxes. We're adjusting minimum wage. That's, I guess, the good thing. We're adjusting wages for tax cuts, right? However, minimum wage adjustment for inflation is now still down in 1990 at $9.20, adjusted for inflation. In 1995, minimum wage now rose to $4.25. Adjusted for inflation, is now at $8.72. President Clinton proposed a tax reform by increasing, I should say, not tax cut, a tax increase in 1993, right, to try to balance out the major deficit that we've got, because we had approximately 19 billion, I do believe it was 19 billion, not adjusted for inflation, during the 80s, during Reagan's tax cuts, that we lost revenue. So in 1990, or I said 1995, in 2020, we saw a minimum wage at $5.15, adjusted for inflation is at $9.41. There was a lag time, though, increase in taxes. I'm out of time on TikTok, so if the rest, tune into YouTube. In 2020, you've got, once again, 2005, my bad. Sorry, messed up my statistics here. Still minimum wage is at $5.15, right? $8.33 adjusted for inflation. President Bush proposes a tax cut reform in 2001. In 2010, minimum wage is at $7.25. Adjusted inflation is now at $10.32. Minimum wage raised in 2009. However, you also had the Great Recession going on. In 2015, minimum wage still at $7.25. Adjusted for inflation is $9.57. We also renewed President Bush's tax cuts in 2010. In 2018, $7.25 minimum wage still. Adjusted for inflation is now down to $9.02. Trump proposes his tax cuts in 2017. We also are going to see a tariff in 2018. So that one you're not going to feel the effects until 2020, which still we don't have a minimum wage hike yet. So now minimum wage adjusted for inflation in 2020 is at $8.67. But you also have the pandemic and Trump's tariffs added into that. And in 2022, we end the statistics because we can't look at 2024. Minimum wage still hasn't been raised. It's still at $7.25, but adjusted for inflation is now down to $7.95. Right. So the overall growth that you see from real minimum wage from 1980 to 2010 was $4.15 raised in the minimum wage. We had 3 tax cuts and 1 tax increase. We saw a 133.87% increase in growth in real wages in 30 years. Yay, let's cheer it on. All right, amazing. However, right, that's not, it seems good, but it's a 30-year span. However, from 1968 to 1980, where we saw minimum wage go from $160 to $310, we saw a growth of 93.75%. This came out to be 7.8% growth in wages per year. However, from the 30-year span of 1980 to 2010, where we saw 310 to 725, we saw a growth of 4.46% growth per year. So in 12 years, we saw better economic growth in our wages. But however, in the last 14 years, we saw no growth in minimum wage, but we've had tax cuts twice in that time period. So let's look at adjustments for inflation on the real minimum wage than it would be. In 1966, using the data source, $13.05, adjusted inflation from that $1.60. In 1980, the minimum wage would have been adjusted for inflation at $12.29. That's a decline in adjusted for inflation of value of the wage by 5.28%. However, that's a decline of 0.485% per year. Numbers, data, it's a lot of data. I'm sorry. But this is really, really important to understand this all. In 1980 to 2010, the 30-year span, we saw adjusted for inflation minimum wage go from $12.29 to $10.32. That's a 16% decline in your wages adjusted for inflation. However, that's also a 0.534% decline in wage per year. That's higher than the 12-year span again. This is not good. We have all these tax cuts, 3 tax cuts, mind you, in that 30 years, and 1 tax raise. Yeah, it's not turning out so good. This is what's hurting American wages out there, everybody. This is why. It's not because Trump says, oh, my economy was so great, and then the pandemic happened, and then Biden and all that spending. No, it's because our wages have not grown. We have not adjusted for inflation and raised the minimum wage as well to help our wages grow. So from 2010 to 2022, our minimum wage adjusted for inflation went from $10.32 to a $7.95. That's a 22.96% decline in our adjusted for minimum wage value, right? And that's a 1.19% decline per year in our wages. I wonder why Americans are hurting. I wonder why Americans say that, yeah, the economy is not doing well because it doesn't show in our bank accounts. right? But yet, if you look at the economic data, the economy is actually doing well, but our wages are terrible. Here's the data pulled out. We have not raised our minimum wage like we haven't before. We've continued to cut taxes. But here's some fun facts, right? The highest corporate tax rate, that means businesses paying their fair share of taxes, in American history was, drumroll, 1968 at 52.8%. 52.8% corporate tax rate. They were paying for their fair share. That is where most of our gross domestic product was coming from. Our revenue for all our goods coming in to pay for everything that we've got, right, is heavily influenced by corporate taxes. Right? Today, though, the corporate tax rate is at 21%. We've cut taxes, we've cut taxes, we've cut taxes. Right? Oh, and we cut taxes one more time, right? Since 1980. We're down to 21% corporate taxes. Our tax brackets have adjusted, but our wages have not gone up. They've had drastically declined since the 80s. So the highest earnings adjusted for inflation was in 1968, as well as the highest corporate tax rate. When corporate tax rates are high, this is what we're going to get into the next two episodes, productivity is high and our income is high. It's not the other way around. It's not, if we cut taxes, the trickle down effect that's going to happen, that our wages is going to drastically increase. It's going to be wonderful. Trickle down economics does not work. It's never worked. It's actually only hurt us. When Trump says, we got to get back to Reagan policies. Yeah, it's a short-term investment that looks good, but it's not a long-term investment for the American wages. America, you are suffering. Your wages are suffering. It feel good. Oh, tax cuts by Trump again. We want him in office. What, a quick fix? So 1 year you don't have to pay more taxes? Okay, great. But your wages aren't going to adjust for that? And then our revenue keeps going down and we can't pay for things, which drives the prices some more. Here's our final thought for today. So our final aspect is President Trump's tax cut and Jobs Act, so the TCJA, cut the corporate tax in 2017 from 35% to 21%. We've lost a lot of revenue coming in to pay for programs. We use that revenue to pay for our military. We pay for education funding, transportation, so that's highway funding, all that stuff. Welfare programs that you might need, that you think of, that you may need as Americans. Right? Trump is also proposing more tax cuts if he gets elected. He also wants to propose more tariffs. So let's dive in. The last point here. The Trump-Biden tariffs. So Trump proposes them in 2018 and they go up. Biden renews them and increases them, right, last year. So these sources are from the Tax Foundation of 2024. So because of Trump and Biden's tariffs, right, has reduced the GDP by 0.2%. Capital stocks has been reduced by 0.1%, and we've lost 142,000 jobs since 2018. Thinking, well, that's not that bad. It balances out. Okay. But also, remember how we're saying, America, we are feeling it? That economy is doing not good right now? We've already talked about wages. Let's look at what the tariffs have done to you. It's like, oh, we got to go after China and put these tariffs on. But America, you pay for it. The American consumer pays for those tariffs. So here we go. Tariffs have caused an annual tax increase on household goods by $625. So 2018, you feel in 2019, 2020, right? 21, 22, 23, and now we're here. You're looking at almost $4,000 that you've had to pay extra because we've increased tariffs. I teach social studies. The American Revolution brings up a bell here of how Tariffs were one of the reasons we go to war with Britain. Tariffs were one of the reasons the Civil War happens. Huh. Don't know. I'm a history teacher, but kind of the writing's starting to fall on the wall that we have an issue here. Tariffs don't work. It's never worked in American history. Why are we doing it? Anyway, Trump is proposing a 10% universal tariff on all imports. That means every import is going to go up by 10%. Think, all right, okay, we're generate some money, but it's going to be passed on to the consumer. Here's where everyone's going to be happy. Like, oh, we're going to go after China. 60% proposed tariff increase on all imports from China. Like, yes, China, they're going to pay for it. No. The American consumer will pay for that. So simple math terms is this. The 10% for every dollar goes up 10 cents. For a 60% tariff on China goods, for every dollar goes up 60 cents. So a consumer good that's $10 now is $16. A consumer good that was $10 is now $11. $100 is $160. Right? $1,000 phone is going to cost you $1,600. Where are you making up that money from? It's going to hurt China's economy. No, it's going to hurt American economy. Right? So some of the universal goods that we do buy as American consumers on these universal tariffs are consumer goods, pharmaceutical preparations, cell phones. I think most Americans have those. Your normal household goods that you've got, day-to-day things that you use that get imported. Industrial goods, fuel oil. So like gasoline that gets converted to gasoline, it's going to go up. So even though if we're going to drill by Trump, gas is still going to go up. Right? Crude oil, finished metal. Think about how many things are made of metal. Interesting. Automobile vehicles and their parts. So if you need new brakes or anything that needs to be repaired for your vehicle, those parts are going to go up. It's going to get more expensive, America. Capital goods. So any raw goods that we import we make in America are also going to go up. Natural resources. Machinery we make our own goods for in America. That means your products that are made from those machineries in America are also going to go up. And factory products. So everything's going to go up. Your goods are going to go up. You're going to cost of living is going to go up. 60% tariff on China imports. Let's look at some things. Plastics. Just about everything we use is plastic. Smartphones. Once again, everyone has cell phones. Those are going up 60%. That's almost 70% increase. Yeah. How are you going to afford that, America? Display monitors, computers, video game consoles and parts for consoles for video games. A lot of us play video games. You're going to be happy that those products go up too? Lithium batteries. The estimated economic costs of this from Trump's proposed on tariffs that everyone's so excited about, if elected, would shrink the GDP by 0.8%. So that's 0.8%. Stock capital, 0.7%. An estimated 684,000 jobs lost because of that. That is the estimate. It could go up, it could go down. Two questions for you. What has the Biden administration, which now Harris is running as the nominee, and what is Trump proposing for the long-term investment? Right? So what has the investment been in America to make these products we import? Are we making these more products? Trump didn't help make more products here to help lower the costs, that investment. I haven't really seen that on Biden, the CHIPS Act, to make them here, but it takes time. What is our long-term investment that we've got for America? That is the important aspect that we need to see. The other question is, what is the long-term investment in America if tariffs are raised? Trump, this is directed right at you. If you raise tariffs, what are you going to do to invest back into America if you're going to cut taxes and raise tariffs and cause more damage to American wages long term? Trump, you're not going to be around 20 years from now, 30, 40 years from now, where we're going to have to still feel these effects, just like Reaganomics. Right? If the government, the Enlightenment idea, go back to the Enlightenment episode. If the government is not upholding your social contract of your natural rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, or in this case, property, you have the right to revolt. You have the right to amend the government, change the government, America. I don't see this in the best interest of America. I don't want to live in America that destroys my wages. I can't even afford anything. I'm going to end with a quote here from the Tax Foundation 2024 resource. In quote here, economists generally agree free trade increases the level of economic output and income. It's true. It does. You have competition then. And the competition is going to drive innovation, drives wages, productivity. That's the big thing. While conversely, trade barriers reduce economic output and income, like Trump is proposing, and there's really no plan on the Democratic side either. So historical evidence shows tariffs raise prices, which I've shown you it has, right? If you look at colonial time, you look at the Civil War and tariffs, and part of those reasons is why we went to war both times. Right? You'll see, right? So raises in tariffs raise prices and reduce available quantities of goods. So instead of putting tariffs on countries, you actually reduce the amount of goods that are there. So it's a double hit. That means the demand is still high, but we're going to make less product. So demand is even higher, which is going to drive the prices. So the prices have gone up because of the tariffs. Supply and demand kicks in. So prices increase again because the demand is high. Supply is low. Okay. So goods and services will basically decrease for U.S. businesses and consumers, which then results in your lower income, which means you can't buy these goods that are less available, which are costing more, reduces employment, so it leads to an economic recession potentially, and lower economic output. We're not producing as much. So America, you have that choice this November. There are primaries coming up in a lot of states. These are all local elections, primaries that are coming up, whether it's some amendments for your constitutions in your state ballots, whether it's Senate or House primaries that are coming up for seats, or governor races for primaries. America, you have the right to vote. Get out and vote. Please get out and vote. Exercise your right. Do not sit out this election because you still don't like the choices, Harris or Trump. Your future depends on it. Your long-term future will be impacted. If there is no investment for long-term, you're going to feel that effect. So please get out and vote. November 5th is fastly approaching. We are just over 3 months away from it. Democratic National Convention is 16 days away. The VP pick we're going to have next week, probably by Harris. There's a lot going to be happening. So we'll see. So once again, thank you for joining me for Transformation Perspective, Episode 4, Middle Class, 1968 wages versus 2024 wages. Like it, share it, and please subscribe. We'll see you next week.